this massive blowout confrontation between Volodymyr Zelensky and President Trump. And I watched this 5-minute beat-down conversation, this massive fight. And I forgot to breathe, I think, during the entire 5 minutes. And I was so horrified. I'd never seen anything like it, but I've been a journalist for a very short period of time. Geeta Mohan, have you seen anything like this ever, this sort of confrontation?
Never. It is one of those rare moments in diplomatic history.
Everyone who's coming after Donald Trump is saying this was an ambush, this was planned. Senior officials, even relatively sober foreign
I
policy
don't know if it
analysts
was
are saying
planned
this.
in the manner in which it was, because I do think genuinely Trump wanted to go in to that deal, the minerals deal.
Sure.
But since it was a framework agreement and that the real deal was not being signed on that day, I think they had that opportunity. It's bullying tactic.
Right.
You do this, you make it public, you shame the person publicly, so the person has no room left. There is no room now for negotiation. He either has to accept it or he has to reject it.
Let's unravel Geeta's world.
Hello and welcome back to Geeta's World. This is our 120th episode. I'm Shashank Mattoo, and of course, this is the podcast where we sit down once a week with Geeta Mohan, India Today's foreign affairs editor, to discuss the really big foreign affairs story of the week. And of course, I'm sure you already know what we're going to talk about. It couldn't have been anything else. It had to be this massive blowout confrontation between Volodymyr Zelensky and President Trump. I think in future, as journalists, we will ask ourselves, where were you when this news broke? I remember I was sitting at home. Someone sent me this and said that it's 11:30 at night. Someone said, have you just seen this? And I watched this 5-minute beat-down conversation, this massive fight. And I forgot to breathe, I think, during the entire 5 minutes. And I was so horrified. I cringed when I saw this level of confrontation. I'd never seen anything like it, but I've been a journalist for a very short period of time. Geeta Mohan, have you seen anything like this ever, this sort of confrontation?
Never. It is one of those rare moments in diplomatic history where we're seeing the takedown of a leader who is fighting a war. Right. That has never happened. In fact, taking down of a leader the way, or of a president the way it was done at the Oval, has never been done. I have never seen it, and I've covered foreign policy for very many years. I was in fact in office, Shashank, finishing my World Today show, and then as I was leaving, the entire team, on the news desk was glued to the television, and I, because I just changed and come up, and I was like, "What happened?" They're like, "Have you just seen this?" And then I had to go do myself up again because I had to go back on India Today Global to have this short discussion on how humiliating. What just happened on television? And then he goes to say it's good TV. Yeah. So that was a play.
Right.
They knew what they were doing. They knew exactly how they're looking to the world.
Right.
And they wanted, in all probability, to be seen that way.
You think it was an ambush in some senses? Because you look at the entire commentary in America.
Absolutely.
Everyone who's coming after Donald Trump is saying this was an ambush, this was planned. Senior officials, even relatively sober foreign policy analysts,
I don't know if it was
saying
planned
this.
in the manner in which it was, because I do think genuinely Trump wanted to go in to that deal, the minerals deal.
Sure.
But since it was a framework agreement and that the real deal was not being signed on that day, I think they had that opportunity. It's bullying tactic.
Right.
You do this, you make it public, you shame the person publicly, so the person has no room left. There is no room now for negotiation. He either has to accept it or he has to reject it.
Got it.
Zelensky does not have that option, that the elbow room to say no.
Right.
So even from London, he reached out saying that I'm willing to sign the deal, right? So this was tactic.
So let's do this for the audience. Let me set the story here as a good host should. What happens a week before this meeting? Right? I'm going to set the story for the meeting for our audience. A week or two before this meeting, there is a broad sense that Donald Trump now has, of course, pushed his officials to have talks with Russia in Saudi Arabia. Ukraine is not at the table. Europe is not at the table. There is a broad sense that the Americans and the Russians are going to cut this deal and basically make sure that Ukraine and Europe are sidelined. There's a lot of panic. Then it is announced that two European leaders, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron, are going to fly to Washington and try to get Trump back on side and say that, look, we're a team. We have to play this together. The West has to be united on this question. And it seems to work somewhat. Then,
but then they also met the Ukrainians without the Russians in the room.
So then the idea was that Zelensky is going to come in. And Zelensky, what he's going to do is he's going to meet Donald Trump. He's going to try to put any tensions they've had in the past to bed. He's going to make the Ukrainian case, and he's going to sign that multi-billion-dollar minerals deal, which would give the United States large control over strategic mineral reserves of the Ukrainians.
And bring home the point that there are no free lunches.
There are no free lunches. And basically to show to the Americans that, look, you say you've given us so much aid, we're willing to make a good business deal with you and give you control of these resources. Please continue to back us in this war. That is, and then Trump changes his tone just a couple of days before the meeting. He says, oh my God, I called Zelensky a dictator. I can't believe I did that. Oh my God. And he
had no recollection of it.
He had no recollection of this. And then he turns around and also says that, I praise Zelensky for his bravery and so on and so forth, called them courageous. That was the setting for this meeting, that there's some tension going into it, but also a sense in the day or two before that things have changed. Could you just set the stakes for us? Like, what exactly happened going into that meeting? What were the stakes for all the different sides before we get into what exactly happened in that meeting? Just set the story for us in terms of what was at stake for all sides.
See, there was a report. I think Thomas Friedman was talking about it.
The famous columnist, right?
Yes, that there was a meeting that took place and the Commerce Secretary was there to meet President Zelensky.
Right.
And he had pushed a note forward saying, sir, you need to sign this.
Right.
And that was the first time Zelensky saw of a deal, read of this deal, and said, well, I need to consult with my constituency, people.
This is the minerals deal that would give the United States a lot of control over
the government representatives, my ministers, before I sign it. He pushes it closer. And he says, it's this or nothing.
Right.
And I suppose that set the tone and tenor, that's the kind of conversation. So if you see, Trump ahead of the meeting made all these positive remarks saying that he's great and we need to move forward, so on and so forth. But if you see the body language of Zelensky when he got off the car and he was shaking hands.
Right, he looked a little nervous. Nervous, right? Very stiff. Absolutely.
He was not warm. There was no hug there. He's, kept his distance because I think he knew that there was no deal to be signed right now. It was a framework.
Right, yes.
They were going to discuss on the framework as to what is it that America could get.
But nevertheless, there was some idea about doing something.
Because the Europeans had also stepped in. So now the Ukrainians are thinking that it's finite, it's not infinite. So if you have finite resources, this is the lay of the land, this is what we have. Europeans want in too. And so let's have a conversation. I think the Americans don't want to have a conversation right now.
Okay, interesting.
They're telling the Europeans that we are the ones who carried
this conflict, this war,
through up until now. So there is no negotiation. Also, Trump comes from a space where he says, I don't need to negotiate. We are us. We are America. So I think they came from that space.
Right.
And they also came from a space where they think they can negotiate with Putin. And in such a scenario, when you can negotiate with Putin, why would you then negotiate with somebody who you anyway consider weaker?
Right.
Not just weaker,
but dependent
a
on
force
you in many ways. Right.
who does not have the right anymore to negotiate. So you're going into a room thinking this about Zelensky, about Europe, and saying how dare they come thinking that he has some elbow room to say, but the Europeans also want this or whatever. I don't know what the conversations, because the conversations never took place. It ended at the Oval.
Correct, exactly. So now you've given me a fantasy. You've laid down the stakes. Like Zelensky comes in, he's uncertain, he's a little stiff. He knows that he's had this complicated relationship with Donald Trump. Donald Trump walks in. He's been worked on by the Europeans for a couple of days, but he wants to make this deal with... It's never going to be an easy conversation. It's never going to be
It was very
easy.
difficult.
Yes. But
because
then,
even with Macron and Starmer, Shashank, he
they had
insulted Starmer.
Correct. But they,
at the press conference.
But the British Prime Minister, kept his cool and said that, look, this is a...
And then he said, thank you.
Yeah, and this is
the
a bigger
press
deal.
conference ends.
Exactly. This is a bigger deal. So he said, I will keep my cool. I will get things going for Ukraine, and because this is more important than my personal dignity. Then this meeting kicks off. This 49-minute pre-press conference. So this was supposed to be a pre-press conference, after which they were supposed to go in for talks, and then there'd be a press conference afterwards. This is just the pre-press conference, right? This is at 49 minutes. And for 35 minutes, I watched the whole thing, and I felt like until the 35, 40-minute mark, both sides, I felt, put their viewpoint across strongly. Donald Trump made some points that Zelensky would not have liked. Zelensky made some points that Donald Trump would not have liked. So I wouldn't say the atmosphere was warm, but it wasn't extremely tense either.
No,
right?
I think, but Vance was sitting there as a provocateur.
And then something happens and the tone shifts entirely.
Yeah.
Can you tell us exactly what happens? What leads into this massive blowout confrontation that has just
The same thing that happened when Starmer was sitting. It was Vance.
Right.
And it just seems like they come, and a lot of people have written about it, but it felt like a schoolyard bullying tactic where the boys have come together to corner this one boy. Not just from how he spoke to what he wore, to what he was saying. They had it all figured out. They knew exactly how they wanted to play it. I think the provocation for Trump and the politics of Ukraine and Russia can be discussed, and we've discussed it at length in the past as well, Shashank, can be kept aside. And we're just talking about the content over here and the substance of that meeting. Where was it at? It was at a place where Zelensky was trying to make a case for Ukraine, saying that you ought to be with us. You've been with us all through and through, and we've been able to keep Russians at bay to the extent that they could, is because of your support. But we need the support to continue. We will be looking at a minerals deal. But in terms of peace, in terms of ending the war, there cannot be room for diplomacy with Putin.
Correct. So let me.
That was the trigger.
That was the trigger, and this is exactly
Because
the point.
the moment he said that,
Right.
Vance knew that was his cue to step in.
Exactly.
And he stepped in.
And there was a question, I think, from a Polish journalist who was talking about Putin, his past track record on Ukraine, whether he could, of course, whether could be he could be trusted. Donald Trump makes a response, and then J.D. Vance comes in. J.D. Vance talks about the importance of diplomacy. He says that, look, there was a policy under Joe Biden for the last couple of years that has not worked out. We want to try the path of diplomacy. And then Zelensky comes in, and he directly addresses J.D. Vance and says, what kind of diplomacy are you talking about, J.D.? And then goes into a conversation about history and what Putin has done in Russia. J.D. Vance fires back. Everyone has seen this video, but I'm just laying it out for those who may not seen it. If those who haven't seen it should really watch it. J.D. Vance fires back and says
we'll put a link
exactly in the
this
description.
podcast.
And J.D. Vance fires back, says that you're trying to litigate this in front of the American media and the American people. You are trying to embarrass us. So this is this is not acceptable. And then it turns into an all-out fight. They're fighting.
No, it went as low as, have you said thank you?
Have you even said thank you ever once?
For have you been
this
thankful?
president is trying to save your country.
Yes, and Zelensky kept saying yes. I've said thank you so many times. Even today, right. I've been thankful. But
and then Donald Trump gets in.
Yeah, he's not shouting.
Right.
And that you almost saying that you have blood on your hands. That it's your position and you're the reason why so many people are dead. And he spoke about the perils of World War III.
Right. He said you have
and
no cards. There's no way you
and
can
holding
win
him
this
responsible for it rather than Putin. And he said, well, you're weak. You have no cards.
Right. We've empowered you to be a tough guy.
Yeah.
We have empowered you to be a tough guy.
It's because of us
but you do
that
not
you
have the cards. Right. So there's just so much to unpack from this meeting. And then towards the end, there are lots of some reasonable questions were asked to Donald Trump about what happens if Putin breaks a ceasefire agreement with you guys. And Donald Trump says, what if a bomb falls on your head? Which I felt was, a ridiculous answer to a very good question. And then also, I'm sorry, my personal opinion is coming through on this. And also, then you have him also, while Zelensky sitting next to him, say that, oh my God, I've been through so much with Putin. Putin is a leader that I've been through so much with. While Zelensky is sitting next to him, and Zelensky is a person whose country Putin has invaded. So a long list of indignities. It really looked like towards the end, Zelensky had been shouted down. I just wanted to get a sense of, let me start with this question. This has been litigated a lot in the Indian media as well. You've had diplomats, commentators, everyone has weighed in on this. Who do you think was responsible? Who is most to blame for this blowout? Some people have said Zelensky. Nirupama Rao, one of India's most famous diplomats,
See,
said Zelensky is responsible.
sarcastically, Zakaria also said Zelensky because, in a show, Zakaria says, he got it all wrong. He should have just gone and first said, sir, you are the greatest. You're the one who's going to solve everything.
Right.
You are the only man who can resolve this crisis, and then gone into what Ukraine needs. He just went into what Ukraine needs and how and what of it. So if you ask me, that sarcasm plays well even in reality, where I think Zelensky should have handled himself well or better.
Right.
From the body language, you're not looking confident because you don't have any cards to play.
Right.
Then what cards were you playing? If you're there and you wanted to do a spray, you should have been bare minimum with your conversation so that pool could have left. What happens when then they would have had the delegation level talks. And if they would have gone into the delegation level talks, then he could have talked about the deal and what not.
Correct.
And maybe Trump would have heard or not heard.
I also have to feel like...
But Trump and his team are all about, if the cameras are on, they're going to show you.
Right.
And they're going to show you down like how. So I really think that he spoke well. But he should have been more prepared. This was not a space for extempore.
Right, exactly.
That you go and you don't rant about Putin to Trump now.
I was just thinking about that, which is that, like I said, until the
he wants to conduct diplomacy.
Exactly.
Why would you say that there can be no diplomacy?
That was the point. That's exactly what I wanted to say. That the point, J.D. Vance, you can have your views on him, but the point that he made, I thought, was relatively. You may not like J.D. Vance, but you could have said that, okay,
because this is their politics.
This is not a point worth getting into a fight over. You can have a broader conversation about whether the American policy on Ukraine and working with Russia is right. But that comment itself, I did not think it was worth Zelensky losing his temper over. But he did. And then...
No, he didn't lose his temper.
Well, then he pushed back in a way that I felt was very sharp.
And he was very rude. But that's the team. See, when you are going into a room full of people who are going to behave like bullies, and you know it.
Right.
What were you expecting? You were expecting all of them to play nice. Did you not do your homework? Did you not see the Starmer conversation? Right. Who are you? He interjected Starmer, who's the British Prime Minister. They are
long-standing allies of.
They are Five Eye allies.
Right,
they forget about everything else.
They fought 2
Five
world
eyes
wars together, and they treated them that way. Right.
There is no reason, at least if you see that interaction, for him to have interjected the way he did.
Right.
But he did that. Did you not do your homework?
So let me ask you then this.
Did you not know that going into that Oval, you should have minimized the media space?
Exactly. Right.
By talking for 2 minutes and shutting up.
So Zelensky makes some critical errors in terms of how he handles this. He does
not
prepare
the content.
adequately.
I do appreciate the things he said.
Right.
He held firm.
He held his ground. But now Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Now the question I want to ask you here is, what was your sense of? I have seen a lot of commentary on this in the international media, in India as well, and the view from a lot of people was that the Americans may have won the argument. They may have shouted Zelensky down, but they ended up looking extremely bad on the world stage. What is your view of that? Do they end up looking extremely unpresidential, unserious people?
Absolutely.
Bullies in some senses?
Absolutely. Like I said, schoolyard bullies. The boys rounded up one kid and humiliated him to the extent that he is now scarred for life.
Should they just turn the other cheek? Would that have been presidential for them to say, okay, if Zelensky has made that comment, let's keep moving on?
No.
Let's do what we have to do.
No. But even if Zelensky said what he did, they could have been decent about a response.
Right, exactly what I'm saying.
The thing is that there is a decorum that is held even if you're having a spat.
Right.
Which is what Trump had with Macron. And Macron corrected him.
Sure.
And it stopped there because there is a level here. Even with Starmer, he said, okay, whatever. With Zelensky, he knew that he's allowed to do this. Who allowed him?
Right.
That he was allowed to do this to Zelensky in itself goes to show that they're not equal. So if you if you've done your reading, if you've done your homework,
Right.
you know you're going into a room knowing very well that that he's not going to treat you like an equal. This is not Biden administration. This is not the hero that you've been treated as in the whole of Europe. This is Trump.
So-
He's already bad-mouthed you.
Okay.
He's already spoken ill of you. He's
Right.
already said you're not just called your
He
dictator.
doesn't like you. Yeah, he doesn't like you
He
anyway. Right?
does not like your face.
Yeah.
And he made that very, very clear. You did not go in with your homework. Were they wrong? Absolutely. In their behavior.
Right.
But in terms of their, and I might not agree with their politics, but that's their politics. Who am I to question? They won a mandate and have come. And they're saying, I want to engage Putin.
Right.
You sit there and you say, oh, you're telling them
Right.
off that engaging Putin is not going to be a good thing because he has blood on his hands. He's a killer. He's a dictator. We don't do diplomacy with Putin. You're nobody to tell.
Right.
Nobody's anybody to tell Trump anything at this
Right.
point in time.
So let me ask you this question. So we've talked about the mistake Zelensky made. Can I ask you in terms of Trump, J.D. Vance, America's global image as well? In the aftermath of this meeting, you have every single European leader that is aligned with Ukraine come out and put out statements saying we support Ukraine. Japan, I was tracking some of the social media.
In the same
talk.
breath, Shashank,
Exactly.
they've also said that we want to continue engaging US.
Yes,
They are
absolutely,
our
because they have no
strongest
choice
allies.
but to. But they have no choice but to.
That's-
right?
that's
but,
that.
But Japan, also, you look at Japan's commentariat, there were lots of people coming out and saying, oh my God, like what happens if we are in a situation like this with China? Are we going to be spoken to like this? If we are a wartime ally, how will we be treated? by
Maybe
the
Japan
Americans?
might not, but Taiwan will be spoken
right, or
down to.
Taiwan will be spoken to. So the question I have to you is, do you think a conversation like this litigated in front of the world media that made such waves, does it do lasting damage to America's reputation and to its alliances and whether people think they can trust America? Because they'll say that, look, you had 4 years of Biden saying that we'll stand with the Ukrainians, whatever you think of that policy.
No, not 4 years. You have had a history of America standing by a pro-West administration in Ukraine,
Okay.
irrespective of party.
Right.
The aberration is not an absolute turning turtle of the American policy, foreign policy. It is of Trump being in power.
Okay, but what do you think this does, this whole conversation? What do you think it does to America's global reputation?
Unreliable. Absolutely. You cannot rely. This just goes to show that Trump might be an aberration. But things have changed in American politics. A lot of the Republicans who are supporting Trump, who think like Trump, are still going to be around even if he's not president. And it should somebody who thinks, a lot of Republicans don't think like Trump,
Right.
don't support
Right.
Trump's ideas.
Like Marco Rubio, the Secretary
Yeah.
of State, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his
Yeah.
couch, but
Yeah.
he was just sitting there like staring at
Yeah.
trying to look
He
away
did-
from that confrontation, but he just looked completely invisible in that conversation.
Yes, because if you look at his larger plan on China,
Right.
this
Marco
doesn't sit.
Exactly.
This just doesn't sit.
Right.
But any which way, there are a lot of Republicans who might not agree, but there are those who absolutely agree with this policy, right? And if they stay, and if they are the ones who return,
Yeah.
then this is not going to be an aberration. This is going to be a norm, a Republican versus Democrat American government. Should anybody then rely on America? Because up until now, on a few things, America has remained steady and firm.
Right.
Its alliance with Europe, absolutely, on anything and everything.
Right.
Its leadership role within the NATO, absolutely firm. It's only Trump who's questioned it. The Five Eyes and a country that they think is so assimilated with them that they can never think of having it any other way, which is Canada. He's turned all of those policies.
Exactly.
So the question of trust has come in, and once it comes in,
So, I also feel like this bullying, people say that America is so powerful, you're always going to need America in the world order, that's for sure. But I also feel like this kind of bullying has an impact on the world stage. Look at what's happened in Canada, right? Trudeau's Liberal Party, which was scheduled to be wiped out in the elections, has increased its polling rating every single week. We're looking at a situation where, and we in India should really pay attention to the story, where the Conservative Party is losing more and more of its lead to the Liberals every single week because they're standing up to Donald Trump. And they're loving it. But Canadian people are loving it.
No, that's because Donald Trump is talking about Canada becoming the 51st state,
Exactly.
which is questioning a country's sovereignty. So yes, Trudeau is gaining ground. But look, Pierre Poilievre, who was praised and appreciated by the Trump camp, especially Elon Musk, today is standing and speaking the same language as that of Trudeau.
Exactly.
Things are changing because he realizes he will not win.
Exactly. If he takes a policy that is very close to Donald Trump. Also, something that we saw in India is that the European Commission came here, entire senior leadership of the European Union. And this was the first time that I could recall over the last couple of years, especially since the Ukraine war began.
This is the first time that 22 commissioners have come outside of Europe.
Exactly. And it was a clean meeting. The Europeans struck a very realistic tone. They acknowledged that, look, the situation doesn't look good for us. We want a realistic partnership with you guys based on economics, on defense, on trade. And I found myself feeling refreshed with that view of Europe. The Europeans saying that, look, the last 30 years have been this sort of fever dream. We need to focus on balance of power.
Expansion.
Exactly. Basic stuff.
Expanding strategic alliances
partnerships
and
all over the world. Exactly.
Because relying on one partner doesn't help. Having multiple partners and them coming together, maybe you'll be able to stand a very, very aggressive.
And it happened because the Europeans were so shattered in some senses by what has happened over the last couple of months with their alliance with America, that they're saying that, look, we need more partners. India is one of them. So already in just these couple of weeks and months, you're seeing this massive shift in geopolitics. I think we're not done just yet. But the big question I wanted to ask you now is, where do the various parties go from here? Ukraine. Zelensky. He then leaves America, is kicked out of the White House, goes to London, meets Keir Starmer, has a much better meeting there. The UK Prime Minister says, I'm going to give you this much money, billions of dollars. And now, of course, you have another meeting. He's had this meeting with NATO, as well as other top European leaders who have promised to give him support. But whether the Europeans can carry this war and help Zelensky keep fighting for a long period of time seems uncertain. Where does Zelensky go from here?
See, it's not about where he finds support now. It's about whether he has support back home. Interestingly, the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK is also the former chief of command, army chief of command, and is somebody who's tipped to be a contender.
Zelensky, right? Valery Zelensky, right.
Valery Zelensky. And then the other very important man who fought the war alongside Zelensky today is standing in the opposite side, not against him and for Russia. It's not the pro-Russia party. It's them just being anti-Zelensky. So I'm just talking about the politics back home is changing for Zelensky. And that's Klitschko, mayor of Kyiv. The Klitschko brothers are not happy with what's happening. So I think what happens from here on is there is going to be a growing demand because they need America. If they need America, what's going to happen? America is going to say, which is what America has already said, this military regime has to come to an end. Let's have elections.
Were you worried about, I want to ask you that question. I don't want to let this go without asking you that question, which is that then you have an American senator, Lindsey Graham, who's very close to the American government, come out and say that, look, Zelensky needs to either fix this or get someone in government who can deal with the Americans, who can fix this relationship, which essentially hints at him moving out and another leader coming in. Do you think that's something that the Americans will push for?
I think it is quite possible because the only way Trump can negotiate with Putin is if the Ukrainians are represented by someone else. The only person Putin will not sit in a room with is Zelensky. He's not averse to the idea of sitting with a Ukrainian, sitting opposite a Ukrainian. He will not sit with Zelensky.
And he said, the President Zelensky is not ready to make peace. He can come back when he's ready to make peace. That's what he said when he booted him out.
But this is not the language Trump will use with Putin because he knows, one, Putin has an upper hand. He does not want this whole China, Russia getting closer with US losing out on a lot. He needs to fix his economy. He's thinking business. He's thinking transactional. And in that, he still needs China.
Right.
So he does not want a competition as such with these parties.
Right.
And so he will want to have them in a room to have a conversation, negotiate terms and conditions, and broker peace, because he does not want to continue supporting this war.
What do you think about Putin and how he was looking at this massive blowout meeting? Was champagne being poured in the Kremlin, looking at how the Americans and Zelensky were fighting?
I mean, not champagne. I'm
But
sure
vodka?
a lot of vodka. But look, they reacted. A lot of people are saying they shouldn't have reacted. They should have been very decent about it. But this is not two countries who are amidst a Cold War-like situation. This is a full-out, full-blown war. And when you are warring parties, then you are enemies. So at such a juncture, if you're asking why did the Russians do it, of course the Russians will do it. They are very happy about it. They
I think it gives them a strong negotiating hand moving forward.
They have an upper edge, and they certainly have one thing that they've solidified, which is land, which they had taken back in 2008 and the rest. Why? Because there's a backstory now that has been told to Trump that this is what happened. America had intervened. And you have, Jeff Pyatt, Victoria Nuland, the conversation that's out in the open where they've openly spoken of how they were bringing about regime change in Ukraine. So I think what Trump really wants to do is that stop interfering, focus on your economy, remain the superpower, and don't have to fight others' fights. And which is what it is going to come to. So the Russians are very happy with this whole idea of America saying, I don't need to fight your war.
I get this. But the question I wanted to ask you was just your own sense of how you've seen the Americans handle this. I think that there are lots of people, especially here in India, I think, who are behind. Like I've interviewed Ambassador Saran on India Today Global. Ambassador Pankaj Saran used to be India's ambassador.
Please watch the interview. It's a really, really nice, in-depth, incisive interview.
And Ambassador Saran has been in Moscow. He was India's Deputy National Security Advisor. And I asked him about this, how the Americans are looking at this. And he was very approving of the fact that, look, broadly the Americans have the right strategic direction, right? That you want to end the war with Russia. It's not worth spending all your resources in Ukraine. You want to dedicate some of your attention to China. Okay, I think lots of people in India can approve of that broad strategic message. But in terms of the tactical handling of the negotiations and so on, you have called Zelensky here, and you have essentially given all your cards away to the Russians and saying that publicly you have no cards. The Ukrainian military is weak. You're finding it difficult to mobilize men. Without us, you are nothing, and we don't intend to support you. So the view is, if you are going up toe-to-toe against the Russians and you want to negotiate something with Vladimir Putin, a strong negotiator, are the Americans really setting themselves up for a good deal, having publicly humiliated Zelensky this way and publicly saying that the Ukrainians have no cards, the emperor has no clothes? Were they right to do that? Because then tactically, haven't you lost out already before you've even negotiated anything?
Not really, because Putin, I think, is smarter than Zelensky and knows that Trump can do this to him too. So Putin has no cards. So he's saying you have no cards against the Russians.
Right.
But Putin, he'll just say you have no cards against America. I mean, what are you talking about? Here I'm coming to you saying that you will be out of isolation. Putin is not going to use the language Zelensky did. See, there's a huge difference in how Putin conducts himself and how Zelensky conducts himself. Zelensky conducts himself like a war hero, a victim. He will talk like that. He will talk about,
Slightly self-righteous.
Yes.
Slightly, yes.
Putin doesn't
Doesn't
all of
flatter,
that.
right.
He will come. He will make his 1.5 minute opening remark. Then let Trump speak. And then if he thinks he needs to, he'll go out on a spiel if he wants to. He can do very lengthy conversations. But I think he will allow you to play in public as less as can be and in private as much as can be.
Right.
So the strategy, I think, is going to be very different. And they will study. They'll study exactly what. And everything will be not just previous conversation being minuted. Everything will be planned as per schedule. That this is when you come, this is when the spray pool comes, they come, they ask a few questions.
Right.
With the Russians, in all probability, it will all be prepared in advance.
right.
And then they leave, and then you do your thing.
Right. So you don't think that the Americans have put themselves in a difficult position? Because
I don't think
I was
so.
just looking at, the defense secretary.
Why?
Pete Hegseth, right? The defense secretary of the United States, goes to Ukraine, goes to Europe and says, this happened a couple of weeks ago, where he says that, look, there's going to be no NATO membership for Ukraine. We're going to have to talk about territory and so on and so forth. And then he walks back some of those statements. And of course, the idea was that, look, of course, all of us can sit down and say that, yeah, sure, Ukraine will probably not get NATO membership, right? But that is a card that you have where you can keep the Russians guessing that we may give the Ukrainians more military support, we may not, but it's a card. So if we say we're not going to give the Ukrainians massive military support, you have to give us something on territorial concessions. But
reality set in 3 years ago. Shashank. This NATO story and NATO conversation should be over now, because Zelensky was told all this and was given this whole story by US that, you'll be joining NATO because of the whole pretext of this war is the fact that Ukraine insisted on joining NATO, and Putin kept saying that if Russian missiles can't be in America's backyard, American jets cannot be in Russia's backyard. That was the whole pretext. That was the story. And Ukrainians kept thinking, not Ukrainians, Zelensky kept thinking that Ukraine will get NATO membership. And he was promised this by America.
Right.
Only to realize that the moment the country was invaded, there was no NATO membership that would have come for Ukraine.
Right. But NATO was...
Why?
Right.
Because the most important criterion for NATO membership, apart from democracy, freedom, which also don't really exist in Ukraine, it's a post-Soviet state like any other where democracy
is corrupt.
fledgling.
But there is corruption, but
it's not even
It
democratic.
may be a flawed democracy, but it is still a democracy.
No, but that's the whole point. When you look at democracies and the benchmark they have for Europeans who have entered, who are part of, it's a different kind of democracy we're talking about. Over here, it's very, very different.
But
it's
Turkey is also part of NATO, right? There was a very flawed
Post-Soviet
democracy.
but then when they entered...
They were a military dictatorship, though.
Yeah,
a hybrid regime like Pakistan.
Yeah, but they weren't this. And you needed that to stay off a lot of other things, and they were not unstable. The most important criterion, apart from this, freedom of speech, democracy, which you can still say this is a kind of democracy like you just did, which is what every European country is, just a kind of democracy, right? Is stability. Ukraine, since its inception and the initial years, has never been a stable country. They've always had problems at the border. They could have never been part of NATO. Who didn't inform Zelensky?
Right. So
Pray tell.
Correct. So this is the NATO part of that.
After let me finish this. This is very interesting, Shashank. After the initial parts, when people kept saying, "Why isn't NATO coming? Why isn't NATO coming?" Then there were billboards everywhere. Why isn't NATO coming? Has NATO ditched us? And Zelensky kept saying, "No, but we are joining NATO." How was he saying it? Who was advising him? And then after a year of the war, year and a half, there was an absolute realization that they're not joining NATO.
Right.
And that's when he held that press conference and he said, well, let me tell you very clearly, my countrymen, we are never going to be part of NATO. That is very clear now. Why was it clear after being at war for so long?
But the point I was trying to really ask you about is that what everyone seems to back here is, on all sides, is that, look, what we need is, as to quote from the India-EU statement, a just, lasting peace in Ukraine. That a peace that the Americans, the Europeans, the Russians, the Ukrainians, everyone can live with, so that we don't have to keep returning to this fight every 5 to 10 years. That's the end goal that everyone seems to want. But to do that, I mean, Russia has obviously an interest in Ukrainian politics. They want a role there. They want Ukraine to be part of its sphere of influence. That is something the Ukrainians are not happy with, and they're going to fight to keep themselves out of the sphere of influence. The Europeans are going to fight to do that. And the idea was that, look, the Americans can say, Russia, we will respect your interests, but we will also need you to understand that you cannot, this is not the 19th century, you cannot simply walk into this place and treat it as if it was an extension of your own country. And therefore, the Americans would need to demonstrate some strength, which is what Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, had in mind, which is that we demonstrate some strength to the Russians and say that we are still behind Ukraine in some capacities. But what has happened after the Zelensky meeting is they're saying that the emperor has no clothes. We are not going to back the Ukrainians. When he was asked that question when he was asked a question about that ceasefire, he said, what if a bomb falls on your head, right? Which is a reasonable question to ask. What happens if you create a deal with the Russians and they break it? What do you do? And Trump did not have a good answer for that. So the question is...
when he says, and I'm not justifying Trump's answer, that's the last thing I want to do.
Right.
But when a reporter asks, what if Russia violates a ceasefire, violates the agreement, is for America, it no longer is their war. Then it'll be between Europe and Russia. They have to deal with it. So for him, it's almost like like there's so many things happening everywhere.
Right.
How does it matter?
Right.
I wanted peace right now. I'll broker peace right now, and I'll make it happen.
Correct.
The thing over here is that, a lot of people say that, Russia always wanted to invade Ukraine and take over. To a certain extent, it's true that they did think it was a mistake to let go of Ukraine. Other countries were not like Ukraine. Ukrainians are like Russians. They're not different at all. Other states are not. They're kind of quite different. Other European states who were erstwhile Soviet Union. But Ukraine is just exactly like Russia, and Ukrainians are like Russians. Eastern Ukraine has only mostly Russian-speaking people who actually looked up to Putin and felt quite betrayed later when, their cities were bombed. Some of them even then did not stop supporting Putin. So that's how close-knit they are, right? So I'm just saying over here the compromise would be that Russia will get land irrespective. The long and lasting peace will come with land that Russia will get south of Dnieper or the east of Dnieper.
Right. You said this in one of the earlier episodes.
The west of Dnieper is buffer zone.
So
why would Russia want to be at the border of Europe, which is now all NATO?
And I think that you also hinted at the point, and I would state it explicitly as well, which is that for Donald Trump, a good deal is a deal where he just gets the deal done, and he's not really interested in providing for Ukraine security beyond that. He's like, I want to stop sending you guys $100 billion.
No, I'll send if you give me all the resources.
If you give me all your resources. But beyond that, I like Putin.
No free lunches.
Correct. I like Putin. I want to do business with Russia, and I don't want to spend more money on a war here. Therefore...
see, what does he do?
Therefore, I don't need to back you.
What does he gain by doing this? He gains a lot more business-wise. Because he'll break this whole thing of Russia, China getting too close. Not that they'll not be close. They'll always stand by each other.
Right.
But they're not. Then Russia is not. If Russia is not isolated anymore, what will Russia do? Russia will stop de-dollarizing the economy. What is Russia? What are Russia and China doing right now?
Yeah, they're yuanizing the economy. They're using Chinese.
Yes, they're de-dollarizing the economy. The plain and simple goal of Trump is to ensure that global economy is not de-dollarized.
Right.
He has threatened BRICS over and over and over again, Shashank, that if you de-dollarize, you'll have hell to pay. Like, those are his words.
Understood. So if I could ask you two last questions, and this would be quick, rapid-fire questions as well, about the Indian perspective on what has happened in the last couple of weeks. Two quick questions I'll ask you. First question is, how do you think India, the Indian government, Indian diplomacy saw that whole spectacle play out in the White House? I was looking at a lot of the debates around this, and there were a lot of people saying, look, this is Trump. If he could do it with Ukraine, what would he do with India when he disagrees with India? If, for example, we got into a difficult situation with China, is this how he's going to treat India as well and try to shake us down? What is the point of our relationship with the United States? This is one argument. This is something we should be worried about. Another argument that I was thinking about was that, look, what we want as well is a lasting peace, because we don't want to have to choose between the Russians and the West all the time. We want a peace where everyone can live together, and we don't have to keep litigating this Ukraine issue again, because it has costs for our diplomacy as well. So we want a lasting peace, and if you keep humiliating the Ukrainians and Europeans like this, you're not going to get a lasting peace. So that was on one side. The other side is to say that, look, this kind of stuff is all fair game because, frankly, Zelensky was asking for it, which is exactly what Nirupama Rao, the ambassador, said, was once India's foreign secretary. And also that, look, it's got the Europeans in a very nice negotiating mood. They came here, didn't mention anything about human rights, praised Prime Minister Modi for his handling of democracy, and were very, very open and nice to us. So they seem to have gotten a hard dose of realism. So all of this works out for us. So what do you think? Where do you stand? Should we be worried about this, or should we be welcoming something like this?
I think there was a large section that said, "See, the Indians handled Trump better."
I was part of that section.
There was because yes, there's a Threadbare. Please go watch the Shashank's episode of Threadbare. It talks about how India handled Trump better. So that it's neither here nor there. That, and secondly, I think we are better diplomats, or better in not diplomats. We're better in diplomacy than a Zelensky for sure, but also not as intransigent as Putin. So we're not going to be stubborn, but we're also not going to blabber away without having studied the room.
Right.
You read the room. India reads the room.
Right.
So India will read the room before doing anything. And there are going to be very many such occasions of difficult situations coming our way, beginning with the trade talks that will begin not so
long from now, yes.
not so long from now. In fact, near future. And it's going to be very difficult.
My second question, again, rapid fire, is on this whole question.
Nothing was rapid about his rapid fire, by
okay,
the way.
fair enough. Okay, these are long questions. About Zelensky and what you saw about the Indian reaction to what happened to Zelensky. I often used to think that since the war began, that Indians tend to be a fairly pro-Russian lot at particular points in time. They like Putin, and they felt that Zelensky is sometimes a little entitled. You might remember in 2022
Absolutely.
when some Ukrainian diplomats and foreign ministers were suggesting that India had blood on its hands because we were buying Russian oil, and that did set the tone for us not liking the Ukrainians and how they were speaking to us very much. But I was interested to see that once this whole thing broke out, lots of people, especially in my comments when I was writing something about this, a lot of people were coming out and saying, no, we actually appreciate Zelensky for standing up for his country. He stood up to a bully. We respect him more now. What do you think the Indian reaction was? How do you make sense of that?
I think it was brilliant. It was refreshing to see that it went beyond just diplomacy. That on content, a lot of people still stand by what India's position is.
Right.
But everybody called Trump out and the Trump team out for what they projected themselves to be and how they behaved. We are good at diplomacy, but we're also very well-mannered, decent people. And nobody wants to see diplomacy conducted in the manner in which it was at the Oval, in the Oval Office. And that was called out. If you ask the very same people, well, what do you think about the position? They'll reiterate the position that no, Zelensky should know that he needs to now come to the...
Absolutely.
As much as Putin could be held responsible, Zelensky is equally to be held responsible. That's the position a lot of people have taken because of his statements on NATO and the fact that he was not realistic and they have not joined. Like I said last time, forget about NATO. They were not able to even join EU. They have not been able to join EU till date, and that should have been an easy one, or easier than NATO. What happened?
Got it. So you say that Zelensky, despite what a difficult week it's been for him, has still won some admirers here in India. So if Volodymyr Zelensky is watching this, well done. But thank you so much. Again, I think we'll have to close.
At what cost?
At what cost? At what cost? But Mr. Zelensky, you now have some admirers here in. So another thing that we've decided to do is read some of your comments and ask Geeta Mohan what she thinks about them and answer some of your questions. So we've got one commenter here asking if India should ask Trump to help India get Aksai Chin back and liberate Tibet while people are talking of tariffs and trade surplus. Geeta Mohan, do you think this is something that is possible?
See, absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
Because one, if you've not realized that America is not a reliable partner with so much happening, then all this conversation that we've had is a little lost because you don't have to rely on anybody. You have to negotiate. We have a long-standing boundary question between India and China, and we have to negotiate our own terms and conditions on how that boundary is going to be resolved, and whether Aksai Chin will figure or not, because it was given to China by Pakistan.
Right. Yes, parts of the Shakskan Valley and so on. Right, exactly. Exactly. And even here, I don't think that Donald Trump is really in. I don't think we're interested in getting into a border war with the Chinese.
We are not a country that relies on others to
and frankly, I don't think India is interested in going into liberating Tibet at this point in time. history. There's another question by Kalachi729 saying that in the transfer of illegal immigrants, the transportation per se is as per the law of the country. This is when we were talking about the shackling of Indian migrants, whether that could impact the India-US relationship. And is suggesting that, look, why do optics matter? They committed a crime. It is not important whether people are shackled. This is usual for how illegal immigrants are treated. What do you think about that?
But we said that, and I had mentioned
this is part of the SOPs
that
of the
it was
Americans.
part of the SOP. The problem we had was not with shackling and handcuffing. It was the mistreatment. A lot of people complain about not being allowed to go to the bathroom. Somebody's turban was taken off and thrown in the dustbin. So the mistreatment is what we were questioning, while many others questioned the shackling and handcuffing, and it became a political point in India. But in India, everything is politics. Diplomacy is politics. If you see such a scene where people are illegals, they've not committed major crimes over there, but illegals, they're coming in handcuffed, then they will make a political issue out of it. They did, but we broke it down and we told you that that is part of SOP. So many people traveling with a few soldiers in a military aircraft can end up with an incident if they are not secure to their seats.
Okay, understood. Parag Joshi says you should do this more often, especially Geeta, having been a war journalist, gives a good perspective from an Indian mind who's traveled to places of conflict and has great foreign policy and IR knowledge. Please continue this format and please don't become a debate platform, which I think sorry Parag, we did not oblige you on this one, but that was a nice comment, I felt.
Yeah. Thank you. Because we try doing it almost every week, so you can catch us every week, barring a few weeks when I'm traveling or he's traveling and we really can't make time. We try to do it in the studio rather than doing it online. It's not as much fun.
Exactly.
If you're doing it online. So bear with us, but also keep watching us.
Right. And so those are the comments that we have for this episode, but please do write in with comments about this one. We will absolutely address them in our episode next week. If you have any comments at all about this show, you can write into us at this number 8588 966 966, or you can write into us at podcasts@indiatoday.com.
Thank you.